Inch by Inch Mastery. Long time ago, I started to learn Photoshop. So I did some research and found a guy that was the most famous Photoshop teacher. He'd written several dozen books and he has several dozen training programs online. So I started up, got all the software, downloaded all the learning material. And yes, this dude is a Photoshop genius. But he went really fast. He'd do something and I'd pause the video. Then I'd replicate it and hit start. Then 30 minutes later, I'd be finished copying everything he did during that 10-minute tutorial. And it looked exactly like it was supposed to. Only I had zero idea what I'd just done. I probably went through this process a few times over the past decade. I had a desire to learn Photoshop. I tried to read books, follow along tutorials, but the same thing would happen. I would give up after a few months. Then I figured out what I was missing. I didn't have any real specific reason to learn Photoshop. I just thought it sounded cool. I would see these cool Photoshop images and want to be able to do that. But for me, that wasn't enough. Later, however, when I did have a real specific reason to create a specific picture for the cover of a book, I ditched the tutorials. I had a desire for a specific outcome. I was hungry to learn how to create that specific outcome. So instead of just passively learning everything I could so I might use those skills one day, I had a very specific need. And once I satisfied that need, it felt good. Then a while later, I had a different need, and my desire to fulfill that need was satisfied, and that felt good. Now, several years later, I have some decent Photoshop skills. And when I come up to something I don't know how to do, I know I can figure it out relatively quickly. This is one key thing missing for most self-help. Now, most people don't normally consider learning Photoshop to be self-help, but anything you want to do to improve any kind of skill, it works the same way. Unless you have a very specific reason to have the skills, learning them can be clumsy. Paradoxically, this is a function of short game thinking versus long game thinking. It may seem that learning all the elements of a skill may be more long term, but we tend to think of learning all the skills as a short term process. But if you have a very small reason to learn a very small element of any skill, that is much easier, which means you'll tend to repeat this, which means you'll be much more likely to create a long-term learning effect. The more you focus only on short-term outcomes, the more of a long-term life you'll be building. To learn more, visit mindpersuasion.com/3x3.